Toronto Maple Leafs GM Brad Treliving spoke with the media on Thursday about the team's plans for restricted free agent Matthew Nyes and unrestricted free agents John Tavares and Mitchell Marner.
I wouldn't say a whole lot of change right now. Obviously, we're approaching free agency. We've had communication. I'd probably describe it, unless there's, a significant change here. I would anticipate that he's going to hit the market. And I think I said this before too. There's not a Mitch Marner tree that you go to and just replace him. So if that indeed happens, we'll continue to look at ways that we can help ourselves.
Are you confident, Brad, that you can get Tavares and or Nyes done before Tuesday?
Yeah, well, obviously with John, there's a deadline, right? We've had lots of communication, but it's been positive. Right, as I think we said at the end of the year, you've got a player who we both expressed a shared outcome, which is John wants to stay, and we want to keep John. And like any contract, there's only usually just two little stumbling blocks: term and money. Once you get by those, usually things flow pretty quick. Until proven otherwise, that we'll have a good outcome there. Matthew, same sort of thing. Lots of communication. Not the same deadline necessarily. But it goes without saying, Matthew's going to make more than what he's making now in his next contract. And you also want to protect yourself moving into the summer. Past July 1, I don't anticipate, I'm sure the next question is going to be an offer sheet. That's not anything you can operate in fear with, but you have to do proper business. We're very hopeful that it'll get to a good conclusion. When that is, time will tell.
And that leads us to a free agent frenzy edition of Harvey's Hot Takes with Bryan Hayes. So we just heard from Brad Treliving. It sounds like things are somewhat positive in terms of maybe getting a deal done with John Tavares. But in your mind, Bryan, how important is it that Brad Treliving walk away from these negotiations with the Tavares camp looking like he won the deal?
I think it's really important for a number of different reasons, Jay. First and foremost, it's Brad Treliving that came out after the season and said the DNA's got to change with this group. And I think he needs to look internally on that as well in terms of the front office and the way that they operate, because there's been a long history here with the best players, and John being one of them, where the players have unanimously won every contract they've run into with the Maple Leafs. And Brendan Shanahan's not here anymore. And for the longest time, it was Shanahan that I think was driving that. Make sure the players are happy. Make sure the players are comfortable, right? Make sure the players stick around so that you have a quality regular season and you get a chance at success come the playoffs. Well, Shanahan's not here anymore, and this is the first big contract that Brad Treliving's going to run here in terms of John Tavares. And I think it would be a big statement, not only to his team, but also to his fan base, that things are going to change here, that there's going to be a priority on the team-friendly deals, a priority on winning negotiations, that you're not going to treat these guys like gods at the negotiating table. You'll treat them like kings everywhere else, because all these players get treated incredibly well in Toronto. But when it comes to negotiating, you've got to try to win. And I think, again, with Shanahan not here anymore, it would be really significant for his own reputation, Brad Treliving, to quote-unquote win this. But I also think it would be a good thing for Tavares to have it spun that way, because John's a local guy. He's been here for 7 years. He wants to stay. And I would presume he wants to live here the rest of his life and likely be a Maple Leaf ambassador for the rest of his life. And I think Leaf fans, again, they're just tired of these star players constantly focusing on the money and the contracts. And I understand it's a business. I'm not naive here. I get it. This is a business. Players deserve to be paid. No one's ever suggested, myself included, that John Tavares should play for free or for league minimum. But playing the PR game in Toronto is not that tough. It's not that tough. And if this can be spun that John Tavares took one for the team, that he put winning first, that he wants to spread the money around, I think that would go a long way in terms of John being comfortable here, in terms of the fans loving the way that he acted throughout this. And ultimately, what we've learned over the last couple of years is, yes, it's been the core four, but John Tavares has been the fourth guy in terms of the line of criticism, maybe the line of praise from the fan base and from the media. It's going to be Matthews first, Marner when he was here second, Nylander third, Tavares a distant fourth. This would make that distance an even larger gap. right? If you take a team-friendly deal, if you're John Tavares, it's going to be all on what Matthews does, on what Nylander does, and more importantly, what Brad Treliving does with that money that you've left on the table. So I think it would be a win-win for everyone if this deal, the John Tavares deal, comes off as a team-friendly contract.
It seems like the Tavares deal will likely get done if you listen to Treliving on Thursday. It seems very much like Marner is not only heading to market, but heading out the door. And if he does indeed leave Toronto, you have a bit of a warning to Mitchell Marner as he heads out the door. What's that, Brian?
Yeah, the grass is not always greener, right? Like there's a perception that Mitch Marner may be wanting to leave here because there's been too much heat on him, that there's been an imbalance of criticism directed towards him as opposed to maybe his counterparts in the core four or within the Maple Leaf organization, or the Leafs didn't do enough to shield him, or whatever it might be, whatever the perception might be. And there may be truth to that, or that may be legitimately the way Marner sees it, or maybe he just wants a fresh start. But the idea that he's going to go to some market that is not as rabid as Toronto, that's true, right? Wherever he goes in the league, short of, I'd say, Montreal, you're going to have a completely different experience. And if it's Vegas, if it's Anaheim, if it's San Jose, if it's Dallas, any of these teams are not conventional hockey markets. But what you're leaving is comfort. And what you're walking into if you're Mitch Marner, you think you might be running away from the noise, and that would be true from the fans. But I think it's going to be louder for him within his own organization, with whichever team he signs with. Let's say it's Vegas, right? Let's say it's Vegas. And obviously Vegas is not a conventional hockey market. But the fans that they got a great fan base for a team that's not even a decade old. They have really high expectations. They expect that team to win every single year. There have been players that have gone there and brought Stanley Cup final appearances and won a Stanley Cup. If you're Mitch Marner and you walk in there and you get the highest contract that team's ever got, or ever handed out, there's a target on your back. There's people looking at you saying, all right, who are you? You're the superstar. You're making all this money. You better help them win. There's no easing into wherever he goes next, where that was the case in Toronto. When he arrived, he was a hometown kid. It was 100% positive reviews for at least the first 3 or 4 years of his career here, at least from the fans and from the media. Him, Matthews, Nylander, they could do no wrong. Because what preceded them was a decade of doom for Maple Leaf fans and for the Maple Leaf organization. So it was an easing in process. They didn't have to win. They didn't have to be great. They just had to try hard, put a smile on, and people were happy. That's not happening with the next stop. That's not going to happen. You better step in and be ready to win. If it's in Vegas, you better help them win a cup. If it's in Anaheim, you better help them get to the playoffs immediately. Also, there's been shelter here in Toronto. He's been sheltered, Mitch Marner, by the core four. They've all been in it together. Right? It's been Matthews at times, and Nylander at times, and Tavares at times, and Marner at times. You go somewhere else, and you're the superstar that just signed, and you're the highest paid guy on the team, you might be on an island. There's also no loyalty wherever you go next. Right? There's no buildup. You're not the hometown kid. You haven't been there for 9 years. Visions in Toronto, I think, have always been there, of him spending his whole career here, numbers in the rafters, owning all these records. I think that's what the Leafs wanted. And I think it's been proven this year. Even with all the noise externally, internally, they've been trying to keep him. They've been trying to sign him. There was loyalty there for the Leafs. There may not be at the next spot. You go to Vegas, you don't play well, they'll ship you out. So it's going to be a very different experience. And yes, there won't be nearly as many fans. And early on, it will be uber positive and everyone will celebrate you. But it's not going to be Toronto anymore. And I think he might be looking at that like that's a positive. I'm not convinced that'll be the case once he gets there, once he settles in.
Finally, Brian, our hockey insiders keep telling us that right now there seem to be barely any sellers, only buyers. So how many teams think they're just a couple of pieces away from competing? How much are you buying that sentiment that every team is a couple of pieces away from competing?
Yeah, evidently there's 32 cup contending teams in the league. 32 teams believe they're a piece or two away. It's ridiculous, and it's completely outrageous to suggest that there's more than 8 or 10 teams that can legitimately win next year. I mean, that's just the way it always is in this sport, and I would say every other sport, every team sport. Even though we have a full offseason ahead of us, and there will be change, and there will be player turnover, there's 8 or 10 teams that I think I could name right here on your show right now, and one of them will win the Stanley Cup next year.
Yep.
Which means there's 20, 22 other teams that have no shot. So what I think needs to happen here, or what could happen or should happen, is patience is a virtue. And if there's a team out there in the middle of the pack that is playing their cards right or willing to play their cards right and kick the can down the road a year or two and take advantage of the urgency of a lot of these teams, and quite frankly, the ineptitude of a lot of these teams who actually think they're a player or two away from competing, I think you could take advantage of this market. And I'll give you a couple of Canadian teams that would fit this bill, and it's Montreal and Ottawa. Now, I'm not convinced they have the stomach for it. I'm not convinced. But Montreal and Ottawa are not winning a Stanley Cup next year. They both made the playoffs. They're both up-and-coming teams. Are you going to go out there and spend money? Are you going to go out there and get urgent? Are you going to go out there and make mistakes, possibly, and try to bring in veteran players and take another step up and be in the second round? Get to Game 7 of the first round? Or could you possibly sit there and take some of your veterans, maybe flip them for future pieces, and a year or two down the road, you're in a position to absolutely pounce? I'm not predicting that's going to happen. I'm just saying it might be a smart play. Because as we're joking about this, Jay, it's just the truth. Not every team can win, and not every team is that competitive.
Yep.
And anyone that thinks they're actually better than they really are, that's the most dangerous game in sports. But if you're willing to be patient and you can sell it properly to your fan base, man, it could benefit you down the road. You could fleece a team this summer, and then next thing you know, you're off to the races a year or two down the road.
Brian, we get to talk to you next week after free agent frenzy is over, so I'm sure there'll be nothing for us to talk about then. Until then, have a terrific weekend, buddy. This has been Harvey's Hot Takes.
Hot Takes is presented by Harvey's. Customize your burger and get it delivered from our app to your door. Harvey's, it's a beautiful thing.